Fuel What Matters podcast focuses on what fuels you. From products to entrepreneurship to living a healthy lifestyle, we have you covered.
My name is Michelle Giannino. I am the marketing director here at Xendurance, and I am joined today by Milo Finnegan-Money.
That's me.
That's you. Milo is a very interesting cat. He is into endurance parkour, right?
Yeah, that's a thing I made up.
Yep. Okay. That was actually one of my first questions. So we're just going to jump in and just get the ball rolling. Cool?
Sure.
Okay. So endurance parkour. Obviously, I think a lot of people don't know what parkour is to begin with.
Sure.
I've seen people that I thought was parkour. It's clearly not. After watching you, you can follow him at Endurance Parkour on Instagram. We'll have his link in our bio for you. But okay, so explain parkour.
Yeah, so I think the sort of textbook definition is that it's a physical discipline focused on learning utilitarian skills for moving from one point to another through space. So it's kind of like obstacle course training in a lot of ways, but using like the real world instead of staging things.
Okay.
And using that feedback to help you guide what skills are useful and necessary to learn. That being said, it has like branched out quite a lot over time, and I think most people who do parkour at a high level would argue that a lot of acrobatic skills are part of parkour, in that they also just help build a certain kind of physical intelligence that's useful. I personally don't spend a lot of time working on things like flips, but I think I do think they're parkour. So
Okay, so then now that we kind of got a brief on what parkour is, endurance parkour, what makes it unique or different, and why did you kind of go into this new world of I'm not just doing flips and tricks and jumping off the things, which I think you've seen small clips on Instagram, people see it all the time. I mean, now I'm totally enveloped in this world of watching people jump off buildings. So what's the difference and what kind of got you started there?
Well, I think for me, the idea in my head initially was just like, what if I did it for a lot longer or a lot greater of a distance than I usually see people doing it for? And parkour initially probably was trained actually in a sort of similar way to what I'm doing now, because it kind of comes from this little like ghetto suburb of Paris. These like immigrant kids kind of all came up with this sport together. And initially the training was so kind of far-reaching that like they would do things like sleep on a cold concrete floor in an abandoned building all night and not eat and then climb down it the next day. You know, like just really intense things. And the idea was sort of to simulate. I mean, I think even culturally they kind of had come from places and backgrounds where their parents had been through really traumatic things. Okay. And so their idea was that you kind of train in a way that's similar to a realistic situation that requires the sort of your physical skill and your mental skill, and that will sort of prepare you for life to be strong and useful for other people. And then I think the internet sort of changed it because it's like there's a certain way of capturing it and a certain way of sharing it that's just more effective than like what I just described, like people sleeping on a concrete floor. It's like really not, you don't want to watch, no one wants to watch that. It doesn't sound very interesting.
No, it just, you kind of feel bad for the person.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh,
sounds like it sucks.
Why are you sleeping on that concrete slab?
Yeah, it's also a question of whether or not that's really effective training at all.
Right.
But yeah, I think it kind of became soundbited into these really short clips. And so the athletes that had really explosive skills over shorter distances kind of became the most popular and then sort of informed how everybody else trained the sport, because its growth has been almost exclusively through the internet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so like, and so it's kind of morphed like 3 times in the course of like 20 or 30 years because each like generation of athletes, which are only separated by like 2 or 3 years or something, is like kind of reinventing it based on what they're seeing. And it's not that we haven't like written anything down that clearly.
Interesting.
And so I think it was just like after being injured for a long time, I just was kind of fed up with trying to handle really large amounts of force. I just was
Yeah.
like, I kind of reaching a point even just in my body where I was like, this just doesn't feel like this is going to work like long term. You know, like maybe you can jump really far and handle a lot of impact on occasion, but I don't think our bodies are necessarily designed to like fall off like 20-foot things onto concrete like repeatedly every day.
I wouldn't think so, because you do all, like, you know, for those that are listening that have not seen parkour or not seen something like this, like there is no netting, like there's nothing supporting you. It's literally your body, which we'll get into later. I have questions on that. I have many questions on that, but where you're literally just free floating, almost flying basically through the air, or doing flips in just unmatchable places, but there's nothing to catch you. Like when you fall, you fall.
Yeah, you fall. And I mean, learning to fall is like definitely a part of it too.
Yeah. I would imagine you have to educate your body on how to, or educate your mind on how to learn how to fall in certain ways. So like as you are falling, it's not that, you know, what you see in movies where people are just free falling, flailing through the air and just hit concrete in the bottom. I'm sure that's not really an
ideally
effective method.
Yeah. No, I definitely have spent time learning how to fall. I mean, falling is falling. Sometimes it doesn't go that well.
Yeah.
You know?
You can only do so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So endurance parkour, now we're doing longer distances, which you've tracked probably the longest, I think recorded the longest out of anybody, have that record for the longest distance. So what did that entail? What did that look like? Like, what is the...
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I claim it as a record, but it's informal. I mean, I don't know what other people have done. And I know that I was inspired directly by, there was one person, and there's one video from a really long time ago that not that many people have seen. It's on this channel called TK17, if anyone even wants to look for it.
Hey.
It's called One, and I'm pretty sure it is a one-take run through the town where parkour was invented by someone who like traveled and lived there for a couple of years to train. And I remember seeing it like way back in the day, and then I had this kind of like vision for what I was trying to do probably like 4 years ago, and it like came back into my mind, and I went looking for it and I found it. And at the time that it came out, it was like cool, but I think it was hard for us to understand like how difficult that actually might have been.
Right.
Because, and this is just part of training parkour for distance, at least as it is so far for me, is that it's just less flashy. You just make like the decisions you make are just way more practical. It's like, it would be cool to get down like that, but it's a waste of energy and it increases the chance that I'm going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I'm fatigued, so that's not a good idea.
Yeah, so it's less about like doing these hard impact like jumps and leaps, which you see people do in a very short time frame or short capacity or short length of distance. This is more incorporating like a distance running with doing some incredible feats like scaling buildings, jumping off buildings, doing just immense amount of both cardiovascular and strength. I think blending those two together is like what's most impressive about watching this style, because it is really cool to see someone like flag pulling off of the side of a building. You know, that is obviously really cool. But yeah, it's pretty cool. But seeing how far you can go, that I think is really interesting. So one thing I did notice in your videos, though, and for those of you, I urge many of our listeners, whoever you are, to watch it, because looking at the behind the scenes, you hold the camera in your mouth.
Yeah.
And we've had so many people in this office, and people ask me, why not strap a body cam or something to your head versus holding it literally in your mouth?
Yeah, so I guess this is just like a slow process of testing that we've done like as a community. Like I didn't even do this. It's like we've just arrived at the conclusion that the perspective is wrong from everywhere else. Like we just can't get enough. If we put it on our heads, we tend to get no arms and feet in the shot, which basically makes it unwatchable because it just becomes sort of like space blurring past you. It's really hard to sort of orient yourself.
Okay.
And a body mount loses the legs completely. It also doesn't really point the camera where where my eyes are. So like that's the thing about the point of view from the mouth, is that it's actually very similar to the point of view from the eyes, even the direction that the camera's looking. Like that's basically where my eye line is when I'm doing it. And it's kind of nice for me too, because when I watch it back, it's almost like I can do it again in my head and watch it. And it's very similar. You're
getting almost a real look. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what it feels like a little bit.
Interesting.
That being said, I've been holding like this GoPro Session 5, like it's a cube, and it's like Like,
Yeah,
it's pretty decent.
It's really big. Like,
Yeah,
your
I
mouth
gotta
has-
stop doing that.
Like how I was wondering, like, how does your jaw not cramp up like before your body does? Because I
Yeah.
feel like if you're holding your jaw open for that long and squeezing down on a, you know, because there's a level, like, if you've ever, like, anyone who's ever worked out in the history of ever, if you're lifting weights or you're doing anything with any amount of intensity, your body's going through any amount of heavy breathing, even, like, you're pushing down, you're, like, squeezing your jaw, and that obviously creates tension. So, like, that's got to be really hard, and your mouth must get so dry.
Yeah,
so you're just, like, have no choice.
It's I think you may have seen like one video I did in New York where I came down and I threw up at the end.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That's why, I'm pretty sure. It's because
Nothing to do with your cardio.
no,
or your
I don't
ability to
think
do
so.
any of that.
I really think that I need to come up with a better solution, because the particularly with the bigger camera holding it in my mouth it's kind of messing up like the posture of my head that like keeps my nasal passage open, and I tend to like flip back and forth between nasal and mouth breathing, partly because my mouth is open.
Yeah.
It's definitely like limiting how much I can actually do. So like the longest one I ever did, I didn't hold a camera in my mouth. I just trusted the drone pilot to get it.
Right. Because you can see if you guys watch on his YouTube channel or on his Instagram, it pops up pretty often. Is the longest run that Milo did. It's aerial footage, which is actually really cool because you can definitely see the scaling and like how vast you're moving and how much space, like where you are in space, because you know you're crossing over, you know, a baseball field, so everyone can kind of get a relative amount of the distance. And you know, when you're scaling the side of a building, you know, if it's a three-story building, you can kind of figure out, you know, what that looks like. And okay, so that's really interesting. Yeah, I think we should probably figure out a different way for you to hold that camera. So
They actually make a mouth mount that's basically like a mouth guard.
Oh, really?
With a mount for a GoPro on it. And I do need to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure that would too, like protect your mouth as well, and probably make it a little bit easier for you to move.
The one thing about I think really the only way to set those up though is with a normal GoPro, which I don't have, like the 8 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have done it with those before, and sometimes you clip it on stuff because it's sticking out further.
Oh, because it's literally like when it's in your mouth, like it's in there. So like unless you clip, because you're gonna hit your nose.
I have to hit
before
my face basically.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah, no, I'm trying not to do that.
So there's gonna be some playing around, messing around, maybe creating your own invention.
A little bit
of sorts to kind of figure out how you can still get that cool angle. Yeah, because when you're watching it, it literally almost feels like you're in the person. Like it's like you're in a video game, which I think is really unique. The way that you and the other participants, that parkour athletes that, you know, play around with you. I don't really know how you would say that, but you know what I mean? How all of you are doing that and moving in space, it kind of looks like you're all part of your own little video game.
It feels like that.
I could imagine.
It's like a video game, like turned up to really, really hard mode, you know, where you only have one life and like you take damage really quick, and
there's no medic where it's like you gotta get to a medic thing and like you inject yourself and immediately you're better. Yeah,
and it takes a really long time to level up your skills, you know. It just
you can't play for 9 hours.
No, yeah, exactly, because you just get really tired.
Yes, the most intense video game for whoever wants to
real life
to join, which we do recommend. You know, don't do this at home. Obviously, this is an immense amount of training.
Yeah.
I know on Milo's page, he's got a lot of different things that show the back scenes of how you would prepare yourself for certain things. This does take a lot of preparation. This is extremely dangerous. You know, when he is jumping from building to building, he does risk, you know, his life. He could seriously hurt himself. Like,
if you are seriously interested in parkour, you should look for a gym, because that's like a big growing part of the parkour infrastructure or the economy are these gyms that are popping up, like owned and operated by parkour athletes, and they're really great, and they are learning how to. I mean, we're figuring out how to teach this really well, so people can learn quickly and very safely in environments with like proper equipment.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of transition those skills outdoors slowly if you're interested.
Yeah.
It is like multiple year long process. Like,
it's not like you just woke. It's not like you just woke up one morning. You're like, you know what, I'm gonna jump off this building tomorrow.
No. Like, and even now that I think they can teach people quite a lot faster, it still takes years for them to get to even do I mean, people get way better than I am for sure, but like to get to the level that I'm at still takes people like a long time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So let's dive in a little bit to the training on this, because I think that's really unique. You did a little bit of a clip. It's really fun to watch. Obviously, you jumping off buildings because it's really cool, and you running long distances and scaling things that I'm like, oh gosh, what did he just put his hand in? But the training on that. So you do weightlifting style. So I've seen you do like some cleans and some, back squats and definitely some strength building things, which I'm sure is important. And then also like you've been at rock climbing gyms. So what is a normal, for someone, an athlete of your style, what is a normal like week of training? Like how often are you actually going out there and doing the deal versus in a regular gym and building other
Sure.
parts of your body?
Well, I guess that's a little complicated to answer because a parkour athlete of my style, I'm still kind of figuring it out, to be honest. Like, I've done a lot of different kinds of training methods, and usually I give everything I try at least a year of doing it consistently to really like make a judgment call.
Yeah.
I did lift pretty consistently for like 2 or 3 years, and I definitely saw some strength gains. I mean, obviously, lifting is like, where to go for strength.
Absolutely.
It's
Makes
great.
most of sense.
Yeah. That being said, like for a sport with so much running in it, if I lift too much, I tend to kind of lose some of the transverse connectivity and strength, like the rotational stuff.
Yeah.
My movement kind of suffered a little bit when I focused on lifting too much.
Because it's very linear.
Because it's
There's
like
not
really
a lot of
yeah.
like side to side agility. It's very much up and down, straightforward.
Yeah, and so it is also just a question of like how do you take those strength gains and then sort of integrate them into sort of the neuromuscular patterns that you need. And I don't think I did a great job of that when I was lifting. I think I did too much lifting and not enough parkour. So there wasn't kind of the going back and forth that I think is necessary to kind of take the strength and then reapply.
Yeah.
And currently I've taken a hiatus from lifting. I actually think that for what I'm doing, I probably have the strength I need now.
Yeah.
And if I lift once or twice a month, I'll be able to maintain the strength that I have pretty comfortably. And it's more now about, like I'm really interested in biomechanics and the idea that if I can increase the efficiency of the intermuscular connections during movement, I can go for longer. And also, I have some postural problems that I think are affecting me. And those aren't necessarily directly related to endurance parkour. See, like, here's the other thing is, like, I feel like if I wanted to, I could knock a mile out now.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of interested in being able to do this for a long time.
Yeah. So how long can I last?
Yeah, and so, like, trying to approach it from a, like, okay, I want to do this thing, but I want to be able to make sure that doing this thing builds me up as opposed to kind of destroys me in the process.
Right.
And so I'm kind of slowing down a little more than maybe is necessary to achieve the goal. But I also think that, like, long term, I probably will be able to do more if I kind of try and address some of these postural deficits and biomechanical things. I mean, I've spent a lot of time this last 3 months, like really focusing on like learning how to sprint properly. Because I come from like a non-athlete, like I have no formal coaching of any kind. Like I didn't come from another sport or anything.
That was going to be like definitely a next question. Like what did you do growing up? Did you do any sort of athletics? Like did you play any sports or were you what?
I liked being outside and I liked playing, but I definitely didn't take to sports very well. I wasn't like a natural athletic specimen, and I think when you're not, the social setting of sports can be kind of intimidating.
I can imagine that.
I got picked on and beaten up a little bit here and there. And my dad was big into tennis. He tried to get me to play tennis. I didn't like that much. And he tried to get me to play soccer. So I did play some sports, but they were short-lived, and I usually was turned off by the competitive thing.
And you just enjoyed being outside and being active.
Yeah, I liked that part. And I found I just didn't excel in a competitive setting that well, and I probably could have if I'd been able to invest the energy and get the training that I maybe needed, but I also would have needed to want that, and I didn't. And so I was pretty unathletic by the time I was like 14. which is when I found parkour.
Oh, okay.
I would say I was probably the most unathletic I was ever. I think my trajectory in life has completely changed because of finding parkour.
Yeah, because you're definitely, I mean, like, you have to have extreme body awareness and endurance and strength and the mental fortitude to push through injuries, because you've been injured. I mean, you walked in today and you took a little bit of a spill.
This is the worst I think I've
I was literally
going to
ask you what it was your biggest injury so far. And do you think this recent one, maybe explain a little bit about what happened?
Oh.
You're like,
This is
man.
definitely not the biggest injury, but it's the most, it's like the worst fall I've had in, I'm honestly, like 3 or 4 years maybe.
Yeah. Because they don't happen very often now that you're a little bit more experienced, because you premeditate your path before you go out there. I think that's really important too to understand. Like, you premeditate what you're going to do. You don't just like run off a building. Like, you premeditate.
I mean, you got to check whether things are solid or grippy, and before you load all your weight into them really quickly.
And then all of a sudden realize that, like, oh, this brick actually is included in the building.
Yeah. You want to check everything. There's like a minimum amount of preparation that's necessary. And so, I definitely always do that. So, like, this particular thing that I fell on, it was we called pole strides. And a stride is basically like bounding in like track.
Yeah.
And so these poles are pretty big, pretty tall. They're probably like 7 feet tall, so they're already over my body height, which is like for me like a good threshold of like I don't really like to fall from above my body height.
No.
Feels heavy.
Like yeah.
And then they were circular, and they're pretty wide base though for a pole. So they're probably like a foot diameter.
Okay, so it's like a beam. It's like a cylinder beam type thing. We're not thinking like a flagpole here.
No, it's not that small. Like that's like a training technique, and I think part of the idea of this technique is to work on the foot placement and stability with smaller foot placements, and it's usually like a ground level training technique. Okay. Because if you can do it on a pole on the ground, a wall is going to feel a lot bigger and much easier to maintain stability on.
Right.
And this one was just appealing because they were kind of high up, and there was like a long string of them. There were like 14 of them, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I'd been training all day, so I already know that this was where I made my mistake, was I should have looked at it. I got up there, I did like a jump between them. I was like, oh, that's easy, and the grip is good, and we like wiped them all down off the top. And then I did 5 strides, and about on the 5th one, I was coming in, and I started, because you gain a little bit of momentum as you start going, and I kind of thought, I don't really want to keep doing this. So I jumped off to the left and rolled, and that felt good. And then it was this like nagging, and this is a challenge that I'm coming up against kind of for the first time ever, is this feeling of like, well, you can do it, so you should, so you can get a clip, for your Instagram, because you're like trying to get paid to do this. So like, it's important to like get
something cool.
Yeah. And I definitely regret that. I mean, that's it's a line you got to walk anytime you do anything professionally a little bit. It's sort of the same as, right, like, I mean, I don't know, like a gymnast pushing through a mild injury at a meet, right? Yeah. It's like, I kind of want to win, whatever that means for the day.
Whatever winning is.
Yeah.
I want to win today.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of just keep going.
Yeah. But I basically did the first stride and then the second stride, and then I jumped way too far to the left. Because the line isn't straight of these poles; it actually curves.
Okay,
and,
so
like
you have to kind of move.
So there's like it changes as it's happening.
This is an art piece, I'm assuming.
I don't even know what this is there for. It's just like 14 poles.
All right. Maybe it's probably some art installment. This isn't a downtown area, so I'm assuming this maybe some art installment. Maybe there was some functionality at some point. So we got curving large poles that you're leaping off of, and you kind of misjudged a little bit.
And then I'd like hyperextended one ankle and fell like really awkwardly, because I had to do what's called a ghost step, which is basically where you jump and then land on the same foot. Because I was too far left, I couldn't get my left foot onto it. So in the air, I had to pull my right foot forward and try and put it down. The idea in my head was, oh, like I'm too far left, but if I drop directly here, I'm going to hit the pole, like, because it was like kind of in the way of where I was going. So I put my right foot down. Obviously, it's all happening fast. So my right foot came in like 3, maybe 2 inches too short. And so it like hyperextended, and then that kind of pinged me up into like a really horrible position where my feet were like I was basically kind of like on all fours, but in the air.
Oh, no.
And then I had to take the like 8-foot drop like that. And then I had to roll on the side that I don't usually roll on, which is something I'm working on because I shouldn't have that deficit.
You should have an even balance. You can roll on either side depending on if you get in a position that's compromising like such.
Yeah, that's like what the point of learning to roll is. Like ultimately, it's cool if you can choose to do it, but ideally you want that movement pattern there for when you're not choosing to do it so that it happens pretty well. And I honestly, out of the position I was in, I think I rolled pretty good. Like I've seen the clip, and it's better than it felt.
Yeah,
like it looks better than it
I
felt.
watched when you posted that. You made a comment about like this was this is not a good fall. Like watching it from like a outsider perspective that literally knows nothing about jumping off of things like ever. That's not my path in life, I don't think. But I like the ground and I like being on it, so I'm not sure that I would do that. But watching it, it looks pretty graceful. Like you made it look very graceful. Like it was almost like it was supposed to happen. But then you have a little bit of shoulder pain and some other things there. Yeah, it was unpleasant. I mean, it was unpleasant.
The first clip. I mean, in the clip that you're talking about, the first attempt at it was the one that was good. So that one didn't hurt.
Okay, so that was the graceful one that I watched.
It's like 5 steps and then I drop and roll.
Yeah.
That felt fine.
Okay.
I wouldn't even call that a bail.
Oh,
like that was
great.
just me like deciding. So, I mean, maybe I can pull it up later, but it's definitely not that graceful.
We can definitely put the clip on our Instagram. We're totally fine doing that so you guys can see when we post this podcast. We'll put up the clip so you can kind of see the difference between a planned bail and a not so planned bail.
Yeah.
That way you can kind of see just the difference. But I was like, wow, that looks really graceful. But what do I know?
It definitely wasn't super bad. I just like when you roll, you're supposed to kind of miss obviously this part of your shoulder.
Yeah.
And get over to the padded areas on the other side.
Yeah, don't land right where the joint is on the side of the arm. Go towards the back where there's more muscle and just a wider.
Yeah, and I kind of like, because of the position I was in, I had to take the initial part of it right there, and then I like pulled over.
Right in the center of the arm.
Yeah, so I'm a little worried that I have an AC separation, but I'm going to get some imaging this week.
Good. Yeah, obviously, I'm sure, especially with what you do, and in all sports, it's important to, right when it happens, like get something done immediately so that there's no residual damage. So now you're in recovery. So obviously, like right now is like recovery mode for you because obviously, like you can't be swinging off if you potentially have
I can't even do anything right now. I had to ask my friend to like bring, because I sleep in my van.
Yes. Yes, we should probably mention that. Yeah. So Milo travels a lot, so he gets this really cool lifestyle where he can jump off buildings anywhere he wants because you live in your van.
Yeah.
So what's that setup like? Before we talk about recovery and what you're going to be doing next and all the other things that interest me about your life, what is it like? What is that setup like for you in that van?
It's pretty good. It's not like what you've seen on Instagram, like #van life or anything. Like I don't have the like Sprinter van what you can stand up in. So mine is like a small, it's actually technically a minivan, like the wheelbase size. But I think I did pretty good. We like stripped out the inside and put insulation and wood, and there's a carpet and shelving. And I'm a very like aesthetic person, and like the space I live in really affects my mood and disposition. So I knew I needed, like when I wanted to do this with my life. I mean, this is also like, it wasn't like this is like took planning, you know?
Yeah, I would assume that you didn't just wake up one morning and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go out and just be in a van.
Yeah, I know. I mean, just getting the van took a while, you know? Like it cost money, and then I had to like figure out how to fix it up and all that. And so, I kind of knew what I needed, like both emotionally and then like at a practical level to be comfortable. I can cook in there. There's lights. I can read.
Yes, it's literally your home's just on the go.
Yeah, and there's a vent in the ceiling so I can get like fresh airflow during the night. Because I had a friend who lived in his van. And I got to travel across the country with him, and he had no ventilation. Really.
Oh, that probably was.
And we had to sleep in there together, and I swear to God, I was like poisoning my brain with carbon dioxide in the middle of the night. Like
I could imagine.
It just felt horrible.
Yeah,
I was like, this does not feel right.
So you learned, and you applied to your situation and got ventilation put in your van, which is, I think, very smart. Because like that's just that fresh air, and if you're going to be outside, and that's. Yeah,
and me and my girlfriend did a road trip in it. And we drove through like Arizona in the middle of the summer. And I also learned like not to go where it's really hot. Like,
Yeah, it's not. Arizona in the summer.
It's crazy here.
Yes, it is. It is not for the faint of heart.
No.
And also in the dead of winter, if you are outside in the dead of winter, it is very cold
Yeah,
because we don't have anything to absorb heat.
It's true. I can handle that a lot better though, for sure.
I could imagine, yeah, because you can always bundle up more. There's only so much you can do when you're dying of heat, you know.
Yeah.
So that's like your interesting. You know, so you mentioned that you can cook in there. So right now we're in a recovery phase. So what is like diet recovery? What does that look like for someone in your sport? Because we have a lot of athletes that come through here that talk about, you know, I'm keto or I'm plant-based or, you know, there's just, you know, eating for your sport and eating for your life and eating for your health. And obviously at Xendurance we provide a lot of supplemental nutrition. But what does a diet look like for someone doing your lifestyle?
That's another thing is there's a lot of variation. I mean, we like as a sport community haven't really like settled on anything. There are like high level vegan parkour athletes and there's athletes who eat fast food. Like, you know, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's.
I mean, long term, I don't think it's going to work out for them. But in the short term, it seems to be all right. You know? I mean, if you're exercising all day, you can kind of get away, especially if you're a teenager, you can kind of get away with eating whatever.
Yeah.
You know? And that's the thing as well. It's very much like a youth sport activity in much the way that skateboarding is. So like the most of the people participating are probably between 13 and 18. Like, diet is not something they're really, like, thinking about.
Yeah. Do you think it's because it's a kind of, like, not like a rebellious lifestyle, but it is. It is, like, I mean, like, you have to imagine, like, you're not getting, like, for listeners out there, there's not, like, you're not getting permits to do this. Like, you're just...
Maybe one day.
Like, you're just going out, like, you know, you're just going out there and living your best life and, you know, plotting... Yeah,
sometimes I worry that like the FBI will like track my Google Maps, like because I like mark all this stuff down on these maps, like routes and stuff everywhere.
Yeah,
and, like,
but you're not vandalizing anything.
No,
like,
no.
You know, like just to be clear, like they're not going up there like in spray painting and vandalizing situation.
No.
Like,
I mean, the goal ultimately, usually, especially in a situation where there's trespassing, which also, by the way, is like not how most people do this. Most people go to like public spaces and just play like parks and playgrounds.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. And I think that's the best way to do it. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that about like what our public spaces could be like to promote a healthier lifestyles if we kind of treated play as an essential part of living, which I think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for youth. I think that playing outside and having the ability to enjoy the outdoors and have a safe, fun place to exert this kind of energy and different things other than the traditional sports, if you will. Yeah. You know, I've seen different... you know, in Arizona, we have a lot of land, a lot of space. There's still not a lot of overpopulation here quite yet, but they're creating like these like Ninja Warrior style type playgrounds outside for families to go. Because obviously, like adults, they enjoy this stuff too. You know, like who they are. There's a few people I'm sure I know that do this, but
I think like an informal form of fitness, like play, can be really effective for people who aren't sporty. You know, because it just doesn't feel like you're exercising really.
Yeah.
You know? And I think promoting that is good.
So the demographic of it, you had mentioned is like 13 to 17. So obviously you're outside that demographic, just so everyone knows. You know, it's not like a 15-year-old.
It's my 27th birthday this year.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So almost 30.
I know. What the hell?
It's okay. It's great. I'm past that bridge now.
How old are you?
I am 32.
Oh, cool.
So I passed that bridge, and it's just as great as every other year of my life.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to it.
It's a great milestone.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your diet and recovery. So what is that like? You know, obviously he came in here with a box of nuts. So obviously he eats very healthy. He eats well. I know that we talked before. So what does that kind of look like, especially living in the situation that you live in currently? What is that like? What is your diet like?
One thing I'll say about my diet is that I've changed it a lot over the last few years. I feel like I'm settling into something now finally where I'm like, I think this actually is like ideal diet for me. But I've experimented a decent amount partly because there's a lot of conflicting information about diet out there.
Yes, it is very confusing.
Yeah, it's definitely confusing. I guess my strategy was like, well, if I use my body as a testing ground and I commit to a diet for a period of time and then sort of reflect on it at least subjectively. That'll give me some sense, and then I can kind of compare my subjective experience like back to the data that I can find. And I'm kind of settling into something that looks a little more like a paleo or keto diet. I definitely still eat grains because they exist, and like, why not?
Yeah, and they're
they're delicious. Yeah, I mean, my actual personal feeling about diet is like we're omnivores. Like, I don't know that our diet really is as cut and dry. We're meant to adapt to the eating scenario that we find ourselves in. And I think our bodies probably are happiest when we let them eat a lot of different things and stimulate them in a lot of different ways. I think meat is an important part, particularly animal fat is an important part of the human diet, is like kind of what I've been learning over the last few months. And so when I eat meat, I tend to eat fatty meats and not lean meats. There's like DHA, which is like the fat compound that basically makes up your brain. Is like 60% made of DHA, and you can't really synthesize it in your body. Which these are like the things that kind of stopped me from committing to like a plant-based diet. It was like I was kind of like toying with it, and I'd gone vegetarian for a long time. And then when I was in Texas, the friend that I stayed with, he's like a farmer basically.
Okay,
like
so he's not he's not a vegetarian there.
No, he definitely he does like restorative farming and agriculture. So
that's great.
His approach to it is kind of holistic in nature, in that it sees the interplay between the systems of agricultural production. And learning more about that also convinced me that entirely eliminating animals from agricultural systems is probably as damaging to the environment as like what we're doing right now.
Right, yeah.
Like, because I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, like, diet it's like a tiered thing. It's like, I want it to be good for me. I also don't want to like ruin everything for everybody forever.
Right. And I feel the same way. Like, I eat everything. There's nothing I don't eat. I love all foods. I'm willing to try everything, you know, and I just love all food. So I had a really hard time when I was like toying with the same thing, like trying different diets to see like how my body felt on them, you know, and like, you know, doing different cleansing style diets to kind of just, you know, reset my system and everything. And I felt the same way. I was like, oh, I don't want to kill the environment, but at the same time, like, I love food. Yeah. And I love all foods. And it's like, you know, I think that I'm kind of in a similar where like you know, eating in moderation, eating things, you know, and as long as, you know, keeping in mind the environment, that's just my personal belief. I'm not saying that that's like any other, you know, I
think there's a way for us to produce food that's not destructive. I just think we have to rethink what we're doing a little bit. Yeah. And part of the problem is that we've separated the production of different elements of food, and they're not really supposed to be separate. Like, rearing meat is supposed to happen in conjunction with plant growth, because like ruminants are basically giant like manure producing machines that produce like nutrient rich soil, and like that's supposed to be what you use to grow food with.
Yeah, it's like the whole ecosystem. You know, it's the circle of life, if you will.
We had a system that worked a lot better before we industrialized it, probably.
Yeah, probably.
And we need to like figure out how to get the best of both worlds, and I think it's possible, because I don't think we should take any plan that seriously diminishes our quality of life. I mean, we've definitely achieved a lot.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are awesome. Like, I love being able to like have a TV and like my phone and stuff.
Yes, I do too. You know what I mean?
I think it's solvable, and I think investigating our personal health and our personal relationship to food is a really important step for a lot of people, because the more we realize about sort of how we're maybe genetically tuned to eat via the selective pressures that have led us here, the more it'll be easy for us to think about how to build a food production system that serves us and the world. Yeah. Because it's like right now we might be abandoning our own health a little bit in favor of a system that might not really work that well anyway.
Yeah, just because it's the system that's in place currently, and people are making money off of it. And it's a lifestyle.
Lot of money.
And it's a lifestyle for most people. And so I think that I totally am on board with your thought process there with that. I think that the relationship with us as humans and food and the circle of life is always intriguing. And there's so many, we could flood each other with documentaries, I'm sure, on that, but we don't have time for that. And you can watch all of them probably on Netflix. So, okay, so you're in recovery right now. I guess like a recovery phase. While you can't really do much. So what is life like when you are in this recovery phase? What do you do?
Well, this is something I didn't talk about, but the first thing that happens after a fall like that, and I did this with my butt. I remember I posted like a while ago. Actually, I just posted it in my feed. There's a fall that it looks like it's to my back, but it was really to my left, like almost entirely my left glute.
Oh, okay.
But I stop the day of training when it happens, like right away.
Pretty smart. That's probably a really smart decision.
I eat that day, and I usually try and eat really nutrient dense. Like
to
a
start
mix.
that recovery process.
Yeah, and then I usually fast the following day and basically sleep. Like I experimented with this a little bit, and it's been working really well for me with like especially like blunt force, like kind of trauma.
Yeah.
Is that you kind of let your body do. So I don't know a ton about this. This is also something I learned from my friend in Texas, and I'm just trying it out. There's something called metabolic autophagy.
Interesting.
Which is where it happens around like the 12-hour mark of fasting. And this is basically the premise of intermittent fasting as well, is that when you stop eating, your metabolism basically kind of shuts down, and then your sympathetic nervous system, whichever one's the one that's like part of the restorative thing, kind of turns on all these systems that are meant to they're kind of like recovery related, like internal systems. And metabolic autophagy is this thing where as you're starving, your body basically consumes damaged cellular components and metabolizes them and rebuilds them. And so like during a blunt fall, there's a lot of damage to like the soft tissue. Yeah. And it definitely manifests at a cellular level as well. And so I found that what I do is I'll eat the day that I get hurt, and then I basically do what a dog or a cat would do, which is like hide and not eat for a
recover.
day.
You go back to kind of that like animalistic like instinct that we kind of are, and we just kind of like shut everything down and just like, okay, I'm just gonna hide away and I'm gonna sleep for an entire day, however long it
did
takes.
a 36-hour fast, and I woke up and like all the inflammation is basically gone. Like my wrist and foot, like obviously there's damaged tissue. Yeah. But I think that like you kind of get out of the way a little bit of some of the natural biological processes that are kind of like in us a little bit. I mean, they're not perfect. Right. Like we need medicine. Yes. And I'm going to go get an MRI. Like I don't think it's magic. Yeah. But I do think that
it jumpstarts the healing process.
It kind of jumpstarts it. And I also think like going to get imaging with inflammation can be hard for the person looking at the image. Sometimes they can't tell exactly what's going on because the distortion of the tissue is so aggressive.
Yeah, especially when you do an impact fall like that versus like if you're in another sport where like it's a little bit less impact, but there'd be probably more minor inflammation or minor damage to the soft tissue. But in your case, it's going to be most of the damage is there.
Yeah, for sure. And like especially in that fall, I kind of knew like, I didn't do it perfectly, but I did it well enough. Like the fact that I have mild injuries in 3 separate places means that I managed to disperse the force across a good amount of my body. Yeah. And the fact that like I can do this with my arm is a good indication that like nothing's particularly screwed up.
Yeah, you can at least like raise your arm, pick it up a little bit, and it's not like if like you move it a little, it's
I had an AC separation on this shoulder once, so I actually have a really good sense of like what this feels like. Yeah. And like I know that this isn't like tremendously bad, but I do want to get an imaging, and I think mainly so that I have really clear information when I go to a physical therapist.
Do you think that this process would work for someone if it's not immediately after? Or do you think it has to be like right after the injury? So say someone has an injury and they're like, oh, well, maybe I want to fast for a few days and see if that will help. Do you think that would help? Or is it like something you're just not sure because you're just starting this out and playing with your own body?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I don't even have science to back up what I just said. Like I'll be totally straight with you. Like,
well, yeah, absolutely.
It's like I read about it. I thought it was really interesting. My friend was like, I've done this before and it definitely worked. And I felt like I had really good results. Like I've had falls like that before. And as a teenager, when theoretically my body should be recovering faster than it is now. And I've definitely found that this, in the first 24, 36, 48 hours, the change from, I just hit the ground with my whole body to like, okay, now I feel basically fine is like what used to take me like a week, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely shortened that up.
Yeah, I don't know if it would work later in the process. I mean, I think it makes the most sense directly afterwards, also because the trauma probably is like, and the swelling is probably sort of like, I know that like inflammation has a function outside of just like hurting like a lot. And that part of what's going on physiologically is sort of signaling certain processes to like kickstart so that it can repair the tissue. So I think fasting in conjunction with that happening is probably why it's working. That would be my guess, but I still have no idea.
That's very interesting. Yeah,
I think like if you have like an overuse injury, like that's not the way to go.
Yeah, no, probably like medical and physical therapy.
Physical
and,
therapy,
using
like
that
reteaching the body how to move is like the key there.
Absolutely. Okay, well that's really interesting. So just like to wrap up with some just, off the wall, I guess, interesting things is, have you ever been spotted? Like, have you ever been spotted and like gotten in trouble?
Yeah.
Does it happen a lot?
Not a lot, but
what do they do? What did they like?
Well, one time I had a gun basically pulled on me. That was terrifying.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So you were just like, what'd you do?
I was out late, so it was dark, which I think is
not usually a good.
I was dark and I was alone, so I probably looked really sketchy. Yeah.
You're up to no good, sir.
And it was like it was like when I first moved to Denver. And I was like exploring my neighborhood, which is something that often happens when you move somewhere new. You're just like, I'll just go out and walk around and see what I can find,
Yeah.
Kind of start cataloging like things to like look at in the future.
Yeah.
And I found this challenge that required climbing up onto a roof, and I didn't really think about or look at what the building was. And it was the State Treasury building.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah. So I deserved to have someone come out and do that, for sure. And I've been way more conscious of like checking like what the hell it is.
Is this a government building?
Like what is this building?
Is this a building where someone would potentially
like
pull
a bank or like like?
Because some of those buildings look really cool and they're very old, especially in like Denver. Like they're a little bit older, they're a little bit more, and they have a lot more structure, and they're probably more unique looking. And I'm sure that would have been like something that I probably would have caught my eye as well.
Yeah, it looked cool. And then the guy came around the corner, and he reached for the gun. He didn't actually pull it out all the way. Like I was like, I threw my hands in there, and I was like, I'm unarmed. Like I'm just.
Please do not shoot me.
Yeah. And then he like told me to get down, and I climbed down, and then he had me lay down on the floor, and he handcuffed me, and then the police came. But I was really compliant, and I was able to explain. And I think Colorado has one of the older parkour communities in the United States, so they actually both knew what it was that I was doing.
Well,
so
that's probably very helpful.
It's super helpful. Like if someone's never heard the term parkour, you're kind of just screwed a little bit. But they'd heard it, and so they let me go, and I had to do like 16 hours of community service or something. I had to go to court, and then I ended up doing
the community service.
Yeah,
well, that's better than being fined or put in jail or shot.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely way better than being shot.
I would. That would have been the number one injury. I think.
I'm definitely not interested in getting shot.
So I know that you take some of our Xendurance products. What are ones that you usually recommend to people if you're out there like talking to like in just like regular community? We always are interested to see like, outside of, because you're an athlete, like you're a super athlete, like there's a lot of skill I think that's involved in this sport, and this sport is not, there's not like a protocol, like in track and field and weightlifting and gymnastics, there's like a protocol. There's like things you look for, their marker, you're judged on certain things. This sport is kind of just all over the map because you can jump off anything really.
Yeah, and we're still kind of making it up.
Yeah, exactly. So what kind of things what ones do you recommend, or what ones do you think that people should be taking?
Well, I've recommended to every parkour athlete that I've met that they take creatine if they're not taking creatine. I found out more of them are taking creatine than I thought.
Really?
Yeah, like more of my peers were already taking creatine when I started asking around.
For the power, and
a lot of them are kind of power focused athletes, and they're lifting really heavy. Like,
okay,
I just like, I think it's even by CrossFit standards, it's like pretty heavy lifts.
Yeah.
So they definitely know more about strength building than I do, and so they're very focused on that, and they've been taking creatine for a while. But I would recommend it to anyone doing parkour. I mean, it's an explosive sport.
What about someone that's not an athlete?
Not an athlete? I don't really know. I haven't taken enough of the ones that I think, like looking at the product line, like the D3, the immune booster, the collagen and greens, and the
extreme endurance.
And the joint one to me would be the ones.
4.
Those would be the ones that I would suggest if I was suggesting to anybody and no one will listen to me. I'm a terrible salesman. I'm working on it. But the extreme endurance, like, I'm not totally sure about for normal people. I mean, I know what you guys say about it, and it makes sense. And I've definitely, as an athlete, I definitely feel the difference.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can cut this out, obviously, but I'm like not totally sold on the idea that you should be taking it all the time.
Yeah. We'll cut this out, Eric. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. That's just a thought. Like,
yeah, I think you'll be really interested. So we're doing a clinical study right now on the average person.
Sure.
This is a normal person that lightly works out. I'm talking, mall walker.
Okay.
So someone that doesn't really work out, and the results are significantly impacting them more than it does on an athlete. I think because you have to remember the amount of environmental stress and just regular stress, and you not taking care of your body.
Yeah.
So it does have a bigger impact on people that are not. It's almost like similar to taking a multivitamin.
Sure.
And that's the benefit of it. And the same thing with the immune boost. It's a multivitamin. Like, most people aren't as conscientious about their diet.
It's like alkalizing too, right?
Yeah, so it brings your body to an alkalized state, which
Sure.
is a problem with what we experience today, because our food is most people can't really afford to eat organic food, or they don't really know how to cook well enough of what they're eating, and so their body's in a really acidic state because of the amount of poor quality food they're putting in it. So it really helps with that, and sometimes people like to dabble in, drinking a little bit of wine,
Sure.
And that'll obviously increase your acidity level. But
nothing wrong with that.
yeah, so we'll just I'll tell Eric where to clip that. He does all of our editing. But so for athletes, most athletes are taking creatine, and then some of the things that,
I would definitely suggest the extreme endurance for parkour athletes too.
Yeah, because it makes sense for your...
Yeah. I just think it does allow you to increase your training volume.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And you still have to be conscious, because just because you're not having lactic acid buildup doesn't mean that you're not damaging tissue. So you still need to be conscientious of like how much recovery time you actually need. That was one thing that I think I struggled with a little bit, was I probably like overdid it actually for a little bit too long.
Yeah.
Like, because it made it possible to, and
Yeah.
I don't really know how to pull myself back, and I don't have a coach. So it's just like me.
Just you out there being like,
sometimes I'm
should
just
I
like,
stop now?
I'm going to train 7 days a week for 9 months straight, and that'll make me good. And then like 2 weeks in, I feel terrible,
That's so funny. It's
Yeah.
it's like that Kermit the Frog meme that they have, where it's like, should I do this? And it's like, yes, do it more.
Yeah. And so that's a challenge. And I think increasingly there's a good body of evidence to suggest that we don't need to train as much as we sometimes make ourselves to get the results we're looking for.
Yeah.
And so like learning that is also its own challenge. But I definitely noticed a reduction in my lactic acid buildup, and the boost to my aerobic threshold, I think, was pretty clear too.
That's awesome.
And so like, one of the things I was thinking about doing was kind of using it more like a competitive supplement, so that like leading up to like a really, really long line, I might take it in the month leading up to it. That was like something I was thinking about doing.
Yeah, I think it's good to test it. I mean, obviously the longer it's in your body, the more benefits you get from it. We tell people they can take 4 leading up to competitions, 4 and 4. That
Which I
helps.
did before my third of mile line. And I definitely think that I
benefited from it.
benefited from it. I don't know
That's
if I
great.
would have been able to pull it off. Because we shot for like 4 days beforehand. Like we shot like everything that's in that video is like all shot in 4 days. So like it was like,
It's pretty intense.
yeah,
4 days.
like we had to go like film all this like lifting and climbing and swimming and running. That
And
was
people
all
judging you.
all in one day, And so like and it was a bummer, because like the lifts are all like not what my max was at the time. We just had to like lower the weights down to like where I could just like do the reps required to get the shots.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I was like, that's a bummer. I look kind of weak, but that's okay.
I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that anyone who's watching your videos or goes and searches who you are after this will think that you are weak.
I could be stronger.
Everyone can always be a little bit stronger,
Yeah.
a little bit faster.
I'm working on it.
But, well, those are all my questions for today. I'm sure we'll have you back. Just following your lifestyle is just already so unique. So there's so many things I'm sure I didn't ask. But thank you so much, Milo, for joining me. And good luck with jumping off things and running far distances.
Thank you.